So the Mütter Museum is most famous for its legacy collection of about 6,500 human remains. But it might surprise you to learn that that's actually the smallest part of the collections here at the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. The 6,500 biological remains are housed within a larger collection of an additional 35,000 3D objects. So think things like old medical bottles, instruments from the 19th century until today, doctor's bags, uniforms, wax models, really anything that isn't biological but that is connected to the history of medicine. And beyond that, we've got the Historical Medical Library, which houses 450,000 objects ranging all the way from medieval incucabla to modern scientific journals from all around the world and literally everything in between. So a legacy collection means that the collection was really developed during a specific bounded period of time. And that is true for our collection of human remains. These were mostly collected between 1840 and 1940. So it's a really bounded period of time with very, very little modern collecting, again, for biological objects. So that means that you can treat the collection kind of like a time capsule of that specific period. Ways that that works are, for instance, it gives you real window into what some of the big medical and scientific questions and problems of the day were. It gives you a window into the type of therapeutics that were available to patients. And it gives you a window into the way that medicine was taught and practiced. But it's also a time capsule for the society of that period. So where a patient was treated or where a specimen came from, whether a public hospital, a private hospital, or a person's private physician, tells us a lot about the class of that patient and the levels of autonomy that they might have over their body or their care during life and after death. Fetal specimens speak really compellingly to the unique risks of pregnancy, pregnancy loss, and childbirth during a period with very high infant mortality and no access to antibiotics. Severe cases of conditions like scoliosis and ovarian cysts, whose size seem to really defy the imagination, speaks really directly to what type of therapeutics were available to treat these conditions. And by encountering the fact that that's kind of rare and strange now, it invites us to think about the medical therapeutics available to us today. So this perspective raises really important ethical questions about legacy human remains collections. Is it ethical to collect and display body parts that were obtained without a patient's knowledge, especially once we know that the bodies that were the most collectible tended to also be those that were most marginalized in life? But knowledge and ethics evolve, and so museums have to evolve with them in order to responsibly serve you, the public, in addition to our collections that we steward. And the Mütter Museum has been very engaged in this process over the past couple years to really interrogate for ourselves where we stand today. This conversation has really sort of taken off in Philadelphia over the past couple years. There's been very little discussion of a really, really key point, and that is, what ethics are we talking about? What does it mean for something to be ethical or unethical? So in casual use, ethical or unethical translates into our mind as good or bad. But that's really a moral determination. Morals are core values, things like fairness, honesty, or generosity. Ethics are the way that morals are made into actions. So if your moral is generosity, the ethic of that might be giving to charity or volunteering your time. What's really important to understand about ethics is that they are, by definition, evolving, right? Because contexts evolve and communities evolve. And so the behaviors and the ways that it looks in order to enact a core value, even if that core value doesn't change, is always going to evolve as time goes on. And that means that ethics are not only community specific, right? They're meant to really dictate to a specific community about how to engage with each other in a moral way, but they're also historically specific, because as history changes and technology changes and politics change, the ethics for how we demonstrate our core values have to change with the times as well. So if morals are values, ethics are shared agreements within a community about how to enact those values. And this is why you have medical ethics and legal ethics and museological ethics and the ethics of how to live in a house with roommates, none of these really have any relevance to each other because they don't need to. I, as a museum professional, don't really need to know legal ethics because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not practicing law. In the same way that a lawyer, in order to be a good lawyer, doesn't need to know anything about how to ethically run a museum. So that means that by definition, ethics change because communities do. The medical ethics of 1878 would be completely irrelevant to practitioners in 2025 because literally nothing about those medical worlds are the same, right? So even if we know that care for the patient and advancement of science has been a shared value of physicians between 1878 and 2025, the actual practices for enacting that and the rules that govern what doing that looks like look completely different. So in 1878, anatomical collecting from patients would have been an entirely ethical practice because it was the most effective way to learn and to teach about subjects like pathology during a period where you didn't have the internet and computers, and not only that, you didn't really even have color photography, right? So this was really the way that we would advance medical science in the service of treating your patient. But the context between the way that medicine is practiced and studied in 1878 that required the use of specimens looks so outdated today when we do have things like color photography and the internet and visualization technologies that let you see inside the living body in real time. So what do you do with that, right? What do you do with the fact that the ethics of yesteryear are not the ethics today? And how should a museum like the Mütter also contend with the fact that the medical ethics that governed the period where our collection was really developed is distinctly different than the medical or the social ethics that exist today? So the public has been contending with every piece of that question: historical medical ethics, modern bioethics, what it means to display something, what it means to collect something, ownership. They've been really, really engaged in truly all the really important pieces of this very, very thorny question. And this debate typically sounds something like this.
I love the Mütter. It's one of my favorite places, and I take people there whenever they visit Philly.
But all the bodies there were donated without consent. Isn't that messed up? Even if it's cool to look at, it's stolen body parts.
Okay, but back then it was normal to get body parts in all sorts of ways. Sure, we don't do that now, but it was okay then, and the person's dead. Their body parts are already here. What's the harm, especially given the educational value?
Absolutely not. This person was exploited. It's not fair to write off past exploitation by saying that's just how it was and walk away.
These people are arguing, but they're both making really legitimate points. It's a good question for us to grapple with. Does the educational value of the museum and the collection today override the fact that many of these specimens were collected from people that were probably some of society's most marginalized? And that's a really important question for us to grapple with as an institution and a city, because it really comes down to civic values, right? To morals. What does it mean to respect the dead? How do we provide fairness to the living? And what type of autonomy does a person have over their body? So if these people are both making legitimate points, why has this debate felt so fraught and intense? Well, my theory is that it goes back to that question that I asked a few minutes ago about what ethics? When we ask, is it ethical to display human remains at the Mütter Museum, what ethics are we talking about? Because remember, ethics are specific and community-bound and historically bound. And just within that really, really simple question, what ethics? We figure out that there's actually a lot of complexity because we're really dealing with three overlapping different sets of ethics. And this question in this museum are just a dart right in the middle of the bullseye of all three. One of those is historical medical ethics. Questions about how medicine was practiced and studied in the past. How did doctors relate to patients? What was the sort of enactment of power between those two groups? How did physicians learn and teach about medicine? And how did they make medical advancements? What type of opportunities did patients have to pursue different types of care, and what level of agency did they have over the care that they received? We can answer all of those questions in a historical context and give you a really detailed view of, medicine in the past not just being some lawless place where people were doing whatever they pleased, but as a profession that really had its own very specific guidelines for what it meant to be a good physician that was treating your patients and that was contributing to the advancement of medical science. We also have modern bioethics, and modern bioethics is itself historical, right? So it really starts to emerge in the way that we would recognize it in about 1970. So for instance, a question that comes up a lot in this debate is, did the people whose body parts are here consent to being donated or consent to having their body part removed after death? And I can answer that question right off the bat. Mostly, no. And that's not the same as saying that they were collected against consent. It's gesturing to the fact that informed consent is a specific bioethical principle of modern bioethics that simply did not exist in its modern form until the late 1970s. And so if our collection dates from 1840 to 1940, this question of consent, or this sort of idea that we have about how a physician would have even asked for or how a patient would have understood that concept, they wouldn't have had it really available to them. We can ask questions again about, within that frame of historical ethics, how patients did have autonomy over their body or enacted agency within medicine, but those are different than asking if people consented, because they wouldn't have had that language or that concept available to them. So here we already have a conflict between two types of ethics, historical medical ethics and bioethics. They're different. How do we bring them in relationship to one another? Added on to that, we have a third set of ethics, and that's museological ethics. That is the professional ethics that guide how museums collect, how they steward their collections, and how they interpret their collections to the public. Now that has nothing to do with bioethics, right? Me being a museum professional, I don't need to know, how a doctor needs to get X, Y, and Z form signed to do this or that. That's not relevant to the job that I do here as a museum administrator, except for at a place like the Mütter, where it is actually kind of relevant that I know that, because our collections are so wrapped up in the history of medicine and our modern ideas about what it means for medicine to be ethical. So the problem, or the project, that we've had to be really engaged with is how to make these three distinct sets of ethics speak to one another. Because if you re-listen to that conversation between person A and person B, it turns out that they're not really disagreeing with each other. They're just talking about two sets of ethics. So when person A raises questions and concerns about whether or not a specimen was obtained with consent, or whether a patient knew that their body was going to be collected, or whether there was exploitation involved in collection, they are asking questions about bioethics, past and present. How do we reconcile the fact that behaviors that might have been ethical in the past are not ethical today? This is bioethics talking to bioethics. Person B is talking about museological ethics. They're saying, I find the Mütter Museum profoundly educational. I get something by coming here. Coming here makes me think differently about my body, or it makes me feel represented in my disability or my disease. And, the collection is here. It has to be stewarded, it has to be shown. What else are you going to do with it? Those questions have nothing to do with bioethics. They have to do with museological ethics and the responsibility that a museum has to its collections and to stewarding its collections, but also to educating the public. So when these two people are arguing, it's not that they're disagreeing or that there's no agreement that could be found between them. It's that they're arguing past each other. They're not arguing about a shared ethical principle or a shared set of ethics that allow them to fruitfully be in conversation with each other. So from our perspective, both of these people are really just asking for more information, or what they want is more information. The person that's concerned with, whether or not, like, basically how things came into the collection and whether there was exploitation, what they want to know is whether or not that's true. That requires us knowing more about the people that became specimens. It requires us to look at a specimen that just has a label number and try to figure out if we can identify who that person was, or if not, maybe where they were treated in a way that tells us, were they a public hospital patient? Were they in a prison? Were they in an institution? Were they treated at home because they had access to home care? By answering those questions, we can start to speak with more detail, not just about, sort of where the collection came from, but the specific circumstances that specific specimens came into the collection under, right? And that lets us engage more thoughtfully with this question around, exploitation, a lack of exploitation, the agreements that patients and physicians had about whether or not their body parts would be used for study after their death. Because we do know that those agreements existed, those conversations existed. On the other side of the coin, person B, who wants education and who says this place is somewhere that I learn a lot. And, the past is the past, things are already collected. The most that we can do is learn about them because I feel represented here. I feel really engaged here. I learn a lot about myself. That person is also asking for more information, right? They're asking for more context because they want to learn. They want to use the museum as a space to learn a little more about themselves and learn a little more about the past. And so the more that we can learn about our collections and the more that we can learn about the individual people that became biological remains in our collection, the more deeply we can educate you, not just on whatever medical pathology might be represented by a specimen, but also about how that condition impacted a person's life, impacted their movement through the world during the very specific historical period in Philadelphia where they went from being a patient to a specimen. So from our perspective here at the museum, both side A and side B are really calling out for the same thing, and that's increased research on the collections to try and put nuance to our understanding of who the people that came into our collections were. As I said at the beginning of this talk, a legacy collection is a time capsule, right? It's a little window into a very specific period. So by learning more about our collection and really trying to chase down as much as we can, whether it's possible to reattach individual specimens with a human identity, a place of treatment, or a community of care here in Philadelphia, we can really treat this collection like a proper time capsule and a proper window into this period, this 100-year period of Philadelphia's history. We can invite you in not just to learn about pathologies or diseases, but also the way that those things impacted a Philadelphian's movement through the city between 1840 and 1940, whenever they lived, right? We're able to think about how industry during that period, whether it was factories or foundries or hard manual labor or chemical industries or textile industries, impacted the health of people during that time or the disabilities that they developed as a result of their labor. And we can connect that to modern stories about the way that work today manifests certain diseases and disabilities that have to be cared for by the medicine of today, right? So we think that by inviting you through that window into the past and trying to really humanize the patients from which these specimens were taken, we can not only really educate you about the past, we can invite you into thinking about yourself as situated in your own historical moment of medicine and disease and agency and autonomy. And we think that by doing that, by developing that kind of information and that kind of educational perspective, it also allows us to do justice for the people in the past whose bodies became specimens, no matter how they came into the collection. Our goal is to really bring them back into the historical record as human beings that lived lives, that had agency, that made decisions, whose decisions were constrained by the circumstances and the situation around them. That's what we want to offer you, because we think that by building that awareness and that empathy for these human beings in the past, they will help you better understand the own decisions that you get to make or can't make with a lot of agency today in this modern historical moment. So thank you for sitting through some untold minutes of listening to a history and ethics nerd be a history and ethics nerd, and really listening to me talk about this at the level of theory and concept. If you want to see what some of this looks like in practice, watch the other videos in this series where members of our staff dive into some case studies where we have successfully de-anonymized previously anonymous biological specimens in the museum, so that you can get a look for the type of richer storytelling that we can do through this type of research.